Welcome to Universal Design Stories of Change. This podcast series aims to gather the experiences of persons with disabilities in Norway and internationally in order to gain a greater understanding of the benefits of universal design for persons with disabilities and everyone. We would like to thank the Norwegian Directorate for Children, Youth, and Families for their support, and the amazing team from Inclusive Creation for making it all happen. Enjoy this episode.
We
So
are.
I'll just start off. Bianca, tell me a little bit about yourself. What makes you tick? What makes you happy existing in the world?
Thanks for having me. I'm Bianca. I'm 42 years old now. I'm a mother of a daughter of 17 years old. I'm a dog lover. We've got two beagles, and I've got a visual disability myself. And the interesting part is my visual disability and the work I have been doing to include people with disabilities in the Netherlands actually brought me to becoming an accessibility expert, which I recently extended last year to becoming an IAAP certified uh, accessibility expert in. I have to say it right. It's always fun. The CPAC.
Yeah.
Certified Professional Accessibility Core Competences,
Nice.
which I'm really happy about because it also brings the opportunity to not just talk about accessibility and improving the world for people with disabilities from my day job, but it also gives me the opportunity to go beyond that as an expert, sharing my story beyond my employer's perspective. So I've done research which is published, and from that perspective, yeah, I'm happy to contribute, and I'm looking
Amazing.
forward to the conversation.
Yeah. So I want to start off just with that, you as a dog owner, because I was just speaking with a friend today, and she mentioned that her dog is getting older. She also has a visual impairment, and she actually tripped over the dog and injured herself. So I'm wondering, what is it like as someone with a visual impairment, also taking responsibility for your children and taking responsibility as a pet owner? I mean, what are the challenges that people might not know about that you have to face every day?
Now, on the first, it's always being careful to watch. So, for example, if you want to cross the street, and I have two beagles, so they're incredibly they have incredibly personalities, let's say it like that.
Oh.
So one goes right, the other goes left. So you have to make sure that you hold them very well, because my vision sight is a little bit smaller than for anybody else. Meaning I'm only seeing 3% with one eye. The other one I see a lot more. But the thing is, dogs go everywhere, so you always have to be aware of your surroundings and watch the dog. So that's a big challenge. So if somebody comes running in very fast on a crossing, for example, and I'm crossing, then you can be spooked very fast. And then I'm not just spooked; the dogs also get spooked. So because they respond on your response. So from that perspective, that can bring you in complicated cases. So I'm always like, okay, if you see a crossing, drive slower because people can cross the street. I mean, that's the whole thing of showing a crossing. So from that perspective, that's challenging, and I always have, and for me, I'm lucky because our previous dog who passed away last year, unfortunately, she was always very listening, and I could let her walk loose, and then she come back to me. So from that perspective, that was not a big issue. We have now two dogs. One is 1 year old, and the other one is 2 year old. The 2 year old, she listens very well, so I can let her walk loose, and if I call her back, she comes to me, or at least she does not cross the street or something like that. She's keeping her nose on the ground or whatever. But the younger dog, I really need to make sure that I have her on the leash, because otherwise, if something happens, she doesn't always listen yet. And her funny personality is also a little bit naughty, so she likes to do things she's not allowed. So you have to be so incredibly careful to do this and to manage the dogs in
Yeah.
combination with, yeah, it takes a lot. So technically, it takes me 2 times more energy to walk my dogs than it would cost anybody else.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and on the on side, it's okay. I mean, walking the dogs is very relaxing. But on the other side, it's also very intensive because you have to watch everywhere. And the most challenging thing, I think, is walking the dogs in the dark because I don't see much. So they see whatever animal is running around, and I think, hey, I'm going. And then, so that can be a tricky one. So you also have to be alert, always have to be steady on your feet. You cannot let your guard down. So yes, it's draining energy, but on the other side, they're really nice and funny and cuddly and very nice companions in the home office. So from that perspective, it comes all together. I wouldn't live without them.
Oh, I have a friend of mine owns a couple of dogs. I don't know why we're going deep on dog ownership, but we're just gonna, all right, we're gonna follow this line of thought till it hits its conclusion. A friend of mine owns a couple of dogs, and I know she has just an absolute like playpen full of toys and accessories and leashes and treats and snacks and everything else. I'm wondering if there are design issues here when it comes to the accessibility of these accessories, or if you've experienced any.
Actually, that's a good question. I don't know myself. But I
Okay.
do know that I am watching when I buy something for them to play. For example, last year we were traveling to Sweden, and all the nice lakes, and one of them really likes to swim. So we thought, okay, we have a toy which you can throw in the water and it floats. So it would be nice to have something red, and we found something red. So I really look at something that's easy to see, even when you throw it a little bit farther, because if the dog is distracted and it goes somewhere else, then you have to get the toy by yourself. So from that perspective, it's nice if you can find it. So I
Yeah.
always buy toys which are easy visible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and what I also watch is, for example, and especially if you we camp in Norway, for example, the dogs have sweaters, and we also
Yeah.
have a jacket now for the dog. So we buy something with reflecting elements in there so you can see them in the dark.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can never find them back with your flashlight. Except you see, in our case, because beagles have the white tip of the
Mhm,
tail, which they
mhm.
actually breeded for, which is fun.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's how you can find the beagle in the dark, because you see the white tail tipping. Right. Except when they're scared and the tail is hidden.
No, I love it because I mean we're talking about something here, a design feature to whether it's a sweater or even a toy that is accessible for someone who has a visual impairment, but it's also pretty well good for everyone. It's good for the dog, right? They're going to be able to see something that's higher contrast easier. It's good for other people who are also in the area that your dog might be playing, so that they don't, accidentally trip over it or anything like that. So I mean,
Exactly.
it's got so many much value there if we're keeping accessibility at the forefront of our attention. Let me jump to entrepreneurship. So one of the things we wanted to talk about on this interview was, what's your take for entrepreneurs? What can they do at an early stage of their business development to really lean into accessibility in a big way? How can they start to get the ball rolling?
Personally, I always say look around in your environment. I grew up in a small entrepreneurship. My parents had a small business, and it was like the mom pop business, the really small ones, and they didn't have anybody else working there except for themselves. And the interesting part is, my parents actually grew their business. Well, my mom has low vision. My dad has a severe form of dyslexia, meaning that he had not much education because, yeah, that was how it worked like 50 years ago. So from that perspective, his they had, on the one side, a tough start, but they had a very good business and they grew their family on it. So from that perspective, everything was fine. But when you look in general, and especially in these days of current days, it's the important thing is look around, because everybody, if you look carefully, everybody has a person with a disability in their environment. It's simply impossible not to have a person with a disability in your environment, because, and that also includes Norway, at least 1 out of 5 people have a disability. And there's even research which goes beyond that volume. So, from that perspective, I would say look around. And if you see, and it can be your parent,
It,
and see if you have, for example, you have a small shop and you have these signs in the shop where you display your prices. It would be nice if people can read it. So ask, Like, ask your mother who's aging and using reading glasses, can you read this? And if she says, no, it's not readable, then you can think about, can I make this bigger or not? Or does this display becomes unusable? Because that's also a possibility. Um, or in regard to having a online service provider provided, and especially I see that growing in all countries in Europe, more and more has been done online. Most of them are small businesses. Ask a few people with a disability and say, can you review my website? What can I improve? And
Yeah.
especially before you start, so if you
Mm.
don't have the website yet but you're in the startup phase, you can also check what kind of requirements do people with a disability need. And if you start with that, and you make and you make your website, or you talk with your website builder and say, okay, come on, I want to have these and these requirements in my website because I want to have an accessible website, then they can build in with it. So from that perspective, that's a good start. But really start with the people around you, because you have people around you who can tell you what is important. That's the main start I can give for small entrepreneurs.
I absolutely love it, and it kind of harkens back to something that I always tell myself, which is find ways of surrounding yourself with diversity. Stop thinking about your team or the work that you're doing as being like, oh, who can I find who's a good fit? And start thinking about who can be a good addition, whose perspective is not being voiced, whose experience is not being represented. And I think this is
Exactly.
where you're getting at for entrepreneurs. Let me flip the script a little bit. What would this look like for an established multinational corporation with big budgets, can kind of go crazy with this, established in multiple markets? Where would you give them an insight to either start or continue to mature their journey?
What I would first ask in any business is, do you have an employee resource group of persons with disabilities? And I think that is the big one, because if
I love it.
you have employees with disabilities, bring them together and connect them together. They can bring you input on internal organization, which trainings are not accessible, which platforms are not accessible, what kinds of tools fit best. I think that's the big start for any business, and any large business especially. And then
Absolutely.
secondly, and I know that in Norway regulation is far advanced when it comes to the Dutch regulation. So from that perspective, regulation is more already applied. Is that, for example, there are standards you have to confirm with WCAG 2.1 when it comes to digital accessibility, for example. Most businesses have very small groups trained in digital accessibility. But in my opinion, it's so important to make sure that all IT staff, and that includes designers, developers, content owners, and managers, to make sure they know about WCAG 2.1. They know how to apply, and they know how to apply from their role. So give them all training on this. Don't just train a small group of people, because in these days, with digitalization, your digital channels are the most important element you have. So, from that perspective, train. Secondly, train your staff on disability etiquette. And they're very simple things. I mean, I can give you a very simple example: language. Mainly in Europe, we use persons with disabilities or people with disabilities. So we use person first, which is in mainland Europe. And I still include Norway under mainland Europe, even if you're not part of
Thank
the
you.
EU. Uh, but the thing is, in Norway, you also use person first language.
Yeah.
In the UK, for example, they use identity first language. So they say disabled person. We also know that a lot of groups feel offended by using this. So it's really important to make sure, what kind of language do you use as your organization? And the fun part was, what I
Mm.
found is that in organization which are based on UK English, then they also tend to use identity first, even if it's not connecting with local culture. So make sure that your language use connects with culture, not with the language you prefer to use. When it says, okay, we use English of UK English as our office language, make sure that's your inclusive language, so disability related, make sure that that connects with the culture. So in that case, for mainly European operations, I say, okay, use people first. And you can always meet in person. A person says, I prefer identity first because my disability is what makes me me. Then it's fine. You can switch on individual level. But as a business, and that's a small business, it's a corporate business, doesn't matter. At first, a person is your customer, a person is your employee.
Mm,
And that
mhm.
employee or that customer can have a disability. So it's always customers with a disability, employee or employees with a disability. And
Yeah.
I think those are the key things I can give into any corporate organization.